Hi, Harry the Staggers, TR Tony here. Now, shout out Arry The Stag next time you see a bit of nobbing about. Greetings, my fellow Arry The Stag friends. Trust all is well in your neck of the woods, and thanks for the great feedback we've had on the podcast that we've done in recent months. We're doing this month's today, so I hope you enjoy it. And really just start by asking the question, what do you think TR's banging on about this week in terms of nobbing about? Well, for me, now that the boys of summer have gone, by the way, I love that lyric from the track by Don Henley, and if you don't know what it is, then check out the description, the link in the description, I'll put it in there, because boys of summer, do you know what? I always find summertime and summer holidays in particular a very weird, somewhat depressing and a rather false time of year. You see, with the silly season of people rushing off to sunnier climes, to go and sit by a pool with naff all on, apart from perhaps a pair of swimming trunks or maybe a bikini or a swimsuit or whatever, to spend endless days lying about on a sun lounger really does not appeal to me, especially while poseurs, and we all know about those from previous podcasts, they go around nobbing about, strutting their stuff and showing off their toned browned bodies to all and sundry. Look at me! It really is the most ridiculous thing to do, I think. And as you know, being ginger and way past 60 now, I think there is a time and a place for all this kind of malarkey. Fine if you're in your 20s and 30s, but by the time you get to my age and size, I think that it's right to insist on a bit of decorum, don't you know? And it should be legal, I think, to keep yourself covered up north of a certain age. Just an opinion, but maintain some blinking dignity. The idea that we're all young forever, I think, is a bit of a pipe dream. And I'll add that you can also forget those budgie smugglers as well from the 1970s, which I think should qualify as an arrestable offence for even wearing them. And yes, I still do possess a pair. Not that I'd ever put them on now, you understand. They were just in our caravan and have resided there for quite some time. They're a consequence from holidaying in France around 15 years ago or so, where the pool attendant, who was a bit of a mini Führer, to say the least, fully implemented the country's public bathing laws. They do not like swimming shorts. And so you have to wear budgie smugglers or be thrown out of the pool. Well, we had to use our initiative and go and buy a pair from the local supermarket way back when, and I've still got them to this day. But apparently, according to the French, swimming shorts are unhygienic. Kettle and pot, I ask myself. I mean, I've never, ever been so body self-conscious and embarrassed as I was back then. In my defence, I have to say it was very cold, but that's another story. And I've actually since destroyed all the photos that related to that incident. But back to the main story about nobbing about. Of course, when the end of summer happens, all the kids go back to school, of course, and it starts getting colder. And if it's like the UK this weekend, it's much wetter. And yes, those holiday makers all go home, including those fickle boys of summer. Back to their crappy, anonymous little office jobs, no doubt, if truth be told. And I think it's a bit like Sting in Quadrophenia, if anyone remembers that film. And if you don't, there's a link in description, so check that out as well. And it leaves rather a depressing and windswept empty seafront, certainly down on our south coast in Bournemouth, and I'll wager several other holiday destinations as well, and with no one around except for a few fishermen, the odd dog walker or two. That's about it. Just makes you wonder what on earth holidaying and sunbathing is all about, doesn't it? And why we all aspire to have that perfect holiday, which the advertisers would have us believe in when we click the buy button on some glamorous trip they've just sold us. You know, it's a bit like Christmas as well. High expectation for Christmas Day, but it never actually realises into a joyous day, in my experience. The stark reality is that everyone seems stressed and grumpy when they're on their holidays. And, I have to say, largely broke too as a result. I think they're just more aggro than they're worth. Unless, of course, you're going to do something interesting and maybe something useful. See a Roman ruin, perhaps. Read a few interesting mechanicking magazines. There's plenty of those around. Perhaps dive into a scientific book or two, or go on a working holiday even. Or try out a longboat canal cruise around the Cheshire Ring, which we actually did once as boys. 9 guys, 2 girls, and a high church priest. It's a very long story, and maybe I'll share that with you lovely lot one day, but it was a lot of fun. Perhaps visit a city somewhere and enjoy a tour with a guide. You never know, you might actually learn something. As an aside, I was chuffed to bits the other week on a family trip We went up to Liverpool actually, and not only did we discover the value of the hop on and hop off bus scheme, which for the sake of £10 got you around the city with a local guide on a microphone talking us through all the places of interest, which was really good, including in this case the liver birds and the famous Liverpool docks. But my personal highlight on that trip was paying, actually it was only a £5 to go into the original Cavern Club. Yeah, the real one, not the pretend one that's at the docks, the one actually in the city. And many of you will already know that that's where the Beatles arrived on the scene and played their first gigs. And it's a venue, having paid my £5 to get down into, that I found standing by the stage there, very inspiring and spiritual too. You can see the picture on the visual there. I mean, you could just feel the 1960s vibe just standing there looking at the stage, which instantly, funnily enough, was one of their hits. Saw her standing there. And not only did the Beatles become known as a result of playing there, but lots of other celebrities did too of that era. People like Cilla Black, the Stones, the Kinks, Elton John, and loads more famous people of that time, the latter of which I watched an hilarious video on with Rowan Atkinson and Elton John. And if you want a really good laugh, again, check the description, there's a link in there, watch it, it is extremely funny. An interesting holiday is much better in my view than slavering yourself with olive oil and cooking yourself to a crisp for 2 weeks, just so you can go a bit browner than everybody else. I mean, some people get really obsessed with all of this. We've got friends that it becomes some kind of weird competition. You know, they actually get quite jealous of each other. I know people who almost get their Dulux shades of brown colour chart out every night just to see how much browner they are today compared to 24 hours ago. And of course, others in their group as well. And as I say, I've long been out of that particular rat race. I just go lobster red and come up in blisters. So what's the flipping point? And my point today also relates to the behaviours of some classic car owners. I don't know if you saw that quick pivot on the storyline there and the clever link. Well, I thought it was. You see, I've been to a few Wings and Wheels shows of late during the summer months in June and July, and have become very aware, conscious even, of a very strange behavioural classic car owner phenomenon that I'm sure too, if you stop and think for a moment, you've actually also seen it 1,000 times. And it kind of reminds me of the posing sunbathers I was talking about earlier on, or perhaps even those highboard divers you see on old films, those boys of summer. And it's this: when classic car owners turn up to a car show, they get guided in, don't they? They park up, perhaps with the help of some kind volunteering marshal, Boy Scout or whatever, doesn't matter, but they're usually volunteers and they do a sterling job. The owner of the classic car jumps out of the classic, and the very first thing they do is go round to the boot of the car. They open up the boot, they grab a couple of folding chairs, you know, the cheap ones you can buy for £5 at markets, and then out comes the picnic hamper, and they then set up behind their beloved motor, almost like a little camp going there, completely oblivious at all times to the general public who are there to see these cars, and they're wandering around and marvelling at all of these wonderful sights, you know, their cars. And then worse, the classic car owners, they park next to a friend who also has a classic car and turned up at exactly the same time more often than not. Maybe it's pre-prepared, pre-planned, I don't know. But then they form a little ring of collapsible seats behind both cars, an auditorium of classic car owners, if you will. A little bit like a nuclear disarmament party, perhaps, or a small protest group, I don't know. But they're armed, however, with nothing more sinister than a cheese and tomato sandwich and the odd pickled onion, maybe. Oh, and a few sausage rolls, and definitely a flask of something hot. And there they sit, all day long, not moving or bothering to look up to talk to anybody else, posing, just like those boys of summer I was talking about earlier. Chit-chatting to each other, of course, on occasion in between the sandwiches, but at any time daring anybody from the public to invade their space or come and talk to them, or enthuse about their pride and joy classic car to anyone other than their little clique. I mean, I don't know about you, but I've seen it too often now to excuse this kind of behaviour, especially when you see beauties like the ones we saw at Christchurch recently. There was an E-Type XK8, there were loads of Stags, and actually, to be fair, those owners were not AWOL. They were actually engaged in lots of good chat about their cars, and that's just how it should be, I think. And the worst I've seen, I must say, was fairly recently, when you get a gaggle of cars and owners all together. Often, I have to say, guys and gals, it's a local classic car club group, I have to say, who really should know better. Someone decides to bring one of those big wigwam tent covers, you know, the ones that you can get 15 to 20 people underneath quite comfortably. Keep out the rain or keep out the sun, whatever. But they all sit there, backs to the outside world, chit-chatting in their exclusive group where no one dares to interrupt or ask a question. And I have to say, last weekend was a great example. What I saw was 2 sets of husbands and wives, 2 classic cars, 4 chairs that came out, then a rickety wooden slatted fold-out table, the picnic, of course, and then the bottle of Ricard with 4 glasses. I mean, come on, guys, let's get enthusiastic about our beloved motors and make a flipping effort to talk to a few people, for goodness sake. Make yourself presentable and interesting is the moral of the story, I suppose, and actually interested in what's going on. And share that classics dream. You know that's our passion, and I think you'll be very glad you did. And like my holidays story, I suppose, you actually might learn a few things and meet a few interesting characters in the process. After all, I've learned over the years, if you bother to listen, everyone has their own story to tell, and I'm living proof of that. You see, a really good example was I met a guy called Davey down in Sturminster Newton a few months ago. It was in the spring. This guy pawing over Eddie the S he came up to the car and we were exchanging chit-chat and how he'd been in the industry for a very long time, and he loved this car and he loved that car, and wasn't Eddie the S fantastic, and da-de-da. And so we got really, having a good chat, and before you know it, it turns out he is the illustrator that we all know and love. He actually is behind all those Haynes manuals that we've bought over the years. And if you look on the front cover, the hard copy, Haynes manuals, there's a line drawing on the front of those manuals that every one of us, I'm sure, has seen for decades on our car repair guides. And again, I'll put a link in the description if you want to find out more about him. He's a very interesting and talented chap indeed. There was no computers, there was no modelling, there was no graphic design. It was all his own pencil work. Took him around about 9 to 12 months to do each drawing, he said. And you see, for me, that's the real fun of owning classic cars, not just the cars themselves, but you never know who you might meet. And everybody's got a story, but all you've got to do is bother to open up your eyes and get involved. And I'll say a very good Arry the Stag to that. Listen, guys, thanks for listening. Really appreciate it. Have a great week, and we'll see you online on Arry the Stag very soon. Cheers for now. Bye.